As the election draws nearer, an increasing number of conservative commentators are engaging in revisionist history, or, in the case of Megyn Kelly, trying in vain to defend the ludicrous proposition that it's perfectly acceptable for a so-called principled conservative who values law and order to openly support Donald Trump, even if they believe he's an authoritarian insurrectionist, and even if he is convicted of a crime. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play in this video, but the predicate is something that we've already made a video about, which is this guy, Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire. Now, Sununu presents himself as a moderate, an anti-Trump moderate. He's been on Real Time with Bill Maher during the Republican primary. He backed Nikki Haley and was one of her most vicious, outspoken surrogates. He went on Fox News and everywhere else and trashed Trump, basically by telling the truth, that Trump is a loser and an insurrectionist and, somebody who is not all there mentally. But after Trump won the Republican primary, Sununu said, listen, I'm still going to back Trump because he's a Republican and I'm a Republican. And he was recently skewered by ABC host George Stephanopoulos, and everybody was talking about this because this thing went viral. I just want to play a brief clip just to recap what Chris Sununu did and why he was so embarrassed.
So just to sum up, you would support him for president even if he's convicted in classified documents. You support him for president even though you believe he contributed to an insurrection. You support him for president even though you believe he's lying about the last election. You'd support him for president even if he's convicted in the Manhattan case. I just want to say the answer to that is yes, correct?
Yeah, me and 51% of America.
That's like just like an accurate summation of that interview, and it went as bad as it looks. And I will remind you that 51% of America doesn't support Donald Trump. 51% of America has never supported Donald Trump. He's never won the popular vote, and even the most recent slate of polls have President Biden ahead of Donald Trump. But with that in mind, this is what Megyn Kelly and her right-wing co-hosts had to say about the situation.
What a wonderful clip, Megyn, and just a demonstration of ABC's deep and abiding commitment to DEI and everything it stands for by hiring a Democrat press secretary to once again anchor the news at their broadcasting network.
Oh, it's amazing.
Like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. Like, the right half of the country doesn't see these things as rising to the level of criminality. They haven't been treated as crimes when we've had these so-called insurrections by the Democrats challenging elections or turning over police stations, as we talked about earlier, setting them on fire, courthouses as well, all just completely ignored. They're having trouble finding their outrage vein on these Trump behaviors because it's so one-sided. Even the documents case, your guy did that too. Your guy did that, and he took the documents when he wasn't even president, George. I will say I don't think Sununu was all that effective in responding to it, but it was just a complete skewering by an unfair journalist. And by the way, why do Republicans keep going on these shows? Because you're just there to be their little...
That's a better question.
So there was a lot there, a lot of stupid things that Megyn Kelly just crammed in that short amount of time. So let's, I suppose, start in order. She said that, the right wing, the right half of this country don't view these things as rising to the level of criminality. I don't know what the hell she's talking about, right? Because certainly Donald Trump's support has not waned, but poll after poll after poll after poll after poll has shown that a substantial portion of people who are at least open to supporting Donald Trump have said that if he's convicted of a crime, they won't vote for him. It's entirely possible that those are lies, right? That they're lying to the pollsters, or that attitude might change. But based on the evidence we've seen, a conviction would be absolutely terrible for Donald Trump. There is no evidence that a conviction or even these prosecutions are helping him in the general election, which is a problem that right-wingers conflate all the time. It helped him in the primary before there was a conviction, and there's no evidence that it's helping him in the general or that a conviction will help him in the general. Depending on the poll, 50% of independents say they won't vote for Trump if he's convicted. 1/3, 1/4, half of Republicans, again, depending on the poll, who say that they will vote for him, will not vote for him, they say, if he's convicted. So I don't know what she's talking about, number one. Number two, she says these things aren't treated like crimes when Democrats reject election outcomes and when Democrats, burn police buildings and courthouses. So here's the thing. I assume she's talking to the few protests which occurred, the riots which occurred during some of the protests during 2020 in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. So let's break this down. Number one, In terms of election denialism, there is no Democratic counterpart to what Donald Trump did in the aftermath of the 2020 election. None. This is a false equivalence that Republicans and enlightened centrists try to create all the time. So in the 2016 election, Donald Trump won, and the day after, Hillary Clinton formally, publicly conceded. Automatically, she is morally superior and more responsible than Donald Trump ever was. She did it publicly and formally, number one. Number two, she didn't try to litigate her way into an unelected term, right? Donald Trump did. Donald Trump, in addition to never formally conceding or publicly conceding the 2020 election, he tried to sue his way into a second unelected term. Hillary Clinton didn't try to do that. Number three, on January 6, 2017, then Vice President Joe Biden, without fuss or muss, certified the results of Donald Trump's victory. He didn't conspire with Barack Obama, the then sitting president, or Hillary Clinton to kick certain votes back to certain states and undermine Trump's victory. That never happened. When the few Democrats complained about Trump's victory, they couldn't actually make formal objections because it required co-signatures from Democrats in the other chamber, and Democrats wouldn't do it. Whereas in the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection, hundreds of Republicans formally co-signed formal objections to President Biden's victory. So no matter how you slice it, Democrats have never transgressed to remotely the same extent that Republicans have under Donald Trump, to say nothing of the fact that an actual insurrection occurred, right? Democrats didn't storm the United States Capitol threatening to hang anybody because Donald Trump won the election. I'll also point out that with great power comes great responsibility. And this is something that Megyn Kelly would at least say if you asked her. In the 2020 election season, Donald Trump was the sitting United States president. He had a higher moral and constitutional obligation than anybody to behave responsibly, and he failed. Okay, so no matter how you slice it, she is just objectively wrong. Donald Trump's conduct, the conduct of Republicans with respect to elections, is vastly worse than anything coming from Democrats, number one. Number two, when it comes to attacking court buildings and police stations, there were prosecutions by rioters who did those things during the 2020 protests, period. She can go back and look it up. It's absolutely true. Now, are any of them as high profile as what happened during January 6th? No, but that's because that happened, at the United States Capitol, the federal Capitol building. So it's a higher profile, higher station. And it was fomented by a sitting United States president. All of these things merit more scrutiny and national attention. But she seems to have forgotten all the many prosecutions which occurred as a result of the 2020 riot. So again, just complete revisionist history there. So then she says, the classified documents case, your guy did it too. Well, no, that's not true. Special counsel Robert Hur, a Trump-appointed Republican, said that though there was some evidence that President Biden willfully retained classified documents, he couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt because there was also some evidence to the contrary. And he also, in his report in which he said he wasn't going to bring charges and why, he also compared it to the Trump situation. And he said, based on all of available evidence, based on the facts, Donald Trump's situation is just objectively worse. It's considerably worse. Plus the fact that Donald Trump obstructed justice, whereas President Biden didn't. And she also said, well, when Joe Biden took classified documents, he wasn't president, implying that Donald Trump was. No, that's the problem. Donald Trump is not the United States president. He should not have these documents. He is not allowed to have these documents. And when the relevant authorities like the National Archives demand the documents back, he is obligated to turn them over because he's just an average guy, whether you like it or not. He's not the president. He doesn't have those perks and privileges. The second that Joe Biden was inaugurated, Donald Trump ceased to be president and meant that the possession of those documents was wrong, right? So again, she's trying to create a false equivalence where there is none. And then she, of course, complains about whether or not Republicans should be interviewed by mainstream media hosts. Again, I'm shocked. I thought Megyn loved debate. I thought Megyn loved asking tough questions. Megyn, when she's at her best, will still ask tough questions. She's asked Donald Trump within the past 6 to 8 months tough questions. Don't know if she'd do it now because she seems to have regressed to full-blown MAGA cultist, but that's the thing. Apparently, it's okay to ask. It's okay for Republicans and conservatives like her to ask tough questions of Democrats mostly, but also of just whoever they want when they choose to. But it's not okay for liberals to ask tough questions of Republicans. See that glaring double standard? I'll also say, because this is really important, I love pointing this out, Megyn Kelly always complains that the Justice Department has been weaponized under President Biden, and this is one of the reasons why she and so many other Republicans support Donald Trump. I love bringing this out because it's so funny because they always lose on this point. When Donald Trump was president in 2020, the sitting president, he publicly demanded that his attorney general, Bill Barr, prosecute then political candidate Joe Biden and former President Barack Obama. Just a reminder.
Unless Bill Barr indicts these people for crimes, the greatest political crime in the history of our country, then we're going to get little satisfaction unless I win, and we'll just have to go, because I won't forget it. But these people should be indicted. This was the greatest political crime in the history of our country, and that includes Obama, and it includes Biden. These are people that spied in my campaign.
So her guy, the guy she's backing, the guy she admires so much, when he was president, he wanted to weaponize the Justice Department against his political opponents. In this particular case, Bill Barr refused to comply, but I'm not giving Trump credit for that, nor should she. Donald Trump, if he had it his way, would have done to President Biden and to President Obama the very thing that she thinks is being done to Trump. But it's okay if Trump does it, or if Trump tries to do it, or if Trump campaigns on doing it, like he did in 2016 and 2020 and 2024. It's okay for Trump and Republicans to go after their political opponents. But it's not okay for Donald Trump to be prosecuted, a gross double standard for which she should be relentlessly mocked. But it's not just Megyn Kelly. You also have a right-wing political commentator who also presents himself as a principled conservative, Ericson, saying, this is what he said on Twitter: there was no insurrection. That is a left/media talking point. It was a riot, yes. It was not an insurrection. Those who believe this don't actually care about the truth, though. Remember that part. So he was responding to Jeffrey Toobin, saying, in oral argument today, Justice Thomas is minimizing the severity of the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. That's what Erickson's responding to. Ericson got hit with a brutal community note. On January 21st, 2021, Ericson himself said multiple times in an editorial that it was an insurrection. The insurrectionists, quote, the insurrectionists, having constructed the gallows and hung the noose, entered the Capitol calling for Vice President Mike Pence to show himself. This is literally you, the logical consequence of lies. Ericson, also just a beautiful title, very ironic. January 8th, 2021. Now, since the British stormed the United States Capitol, has it been invaded by those out to end the American constitutional system? Those out to end the American constitutional system. Very harsh words. But it happened this week at the hands of American citizens, encouraged by Donald Trump. And let's not mince words here. He told them to march on the Capitol. And then the insurrectionists, second word in the second paragraph. But even though Ericson would prefer, I think he was a DeSantis fan during the primary, at the end of the day, he, like Megyn Kelly and most right-wing commentators and elected Republicans, will put partisan politics above principle and country every single time. They're part of the movement that thinks it's perfectly acceptable for Donald Trump to demand absolute legal immunity because he was, for 4 years, the president of the United States. He wants to be in perpetuity given a blank check to commit crimes with impunity and be put above the Constitution. And swinging right back around to Megyn Kelly, she was part of the Fox Propaganda Network. She was employed by them. She was employed at the time that Fox News was freaking out about President Obama's tan suit, right? So I'm just imagine this counterfactual. Then President Barack Obama in a tan suit comes out and says, you know what? I think that as a president, once I leave office, I'm entitled to absolute legal immunity. I should be above prosecution. It should literally be impossible to prosecute me, even if, as Trump's attorneys argued in court, even if he orders the assassination of political opponents. Imagine what Megyn Kelly would have said, what her colleagues at Fox News would have said, what Ericson would have said if President Obama, a Democrat, had said those things. They would have been apoplectic, and rightly so, because no president, Democrat or Republican, should be given a blank check to commit crimes with impunity or should be given absolute immunity whatsoever. They would have been outraged. We know it. But because it's Trump and Republicans, that's kind of like our guy, right? Even if deep down it makes them uncomfortable, they'll never publicly express it because their notion of law and order, their notion of, principled constitutional conservatism, that's for everybody else. They want to impose their version of law and order on liberals, progressives, marginalized groups, minority groups, people in blue cities and blue states. That's for them. They themselves and one another, Ericson, Megyn Kelly, Donald Trump, elected Republicans, they can do or say whatever they want and be as inconsistent as possible because, they're Republicans and they're above you and I. That's what they think. So just super gross stuff from Megyn Kelly, who at her best is actually a pretty decent reporter, particularly from the right, or a political commentator from the right. But she is not at her best here. She is just the very worst type of MAGA cultist, or at least doing an impression of it. And she completely misrepresented George Stephanopoulos, and also just tried in vain to defend a ludicrous proposition. They do not believe when push comes to shove they should be held to principle, because partisan politics and electoral outcomes trump those things, pun intended. Let me know what you think in the comments.